Welcome. Hello, visitors. Welcome to Amtae Sojak Resistance Museum, the Amtaedo Seoyongseon Art Museum. I am Lee Sarah, broadcaster and author. The Amtaedo Seoyongseon Museum, where you stand today, was built in 1923 to commemorate the historical Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute. This event saw tenant farmers on Amtaedo resist unfair rent collection by landlords. Lasting around a year from August 1923, it was one of the major peasant movements during the Japanese occupation. Not only tenant farmers, but also the Amtae Women's Association, Amtae Youth Association, and all Amtaedo residents participated in the protest. This protest became an important catalyst for the spread of tenant disputes to neighboring islands, including Tochudo and Jeondo. Now, please look around and take in the interior of the building. This museum, with its rough cement walls, was originally a warehouse that stored grain harvested by farmers. It was located close to a historical site of Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute, and artist Seoyongseon worked to preserve the warehouse's original appearance as much as possible. Upon entering the warehouse, the progression of the tenant dispute unfolds counterclockwise from the entrance, from the March 1st movement and Donghak peasant movement to the tragic death of Taeseok, the leader of the tenant dispute. You will now encounter the great stories contained within this small museum. Let's take a walk through the museum. The March 1st movement and Donghak peasant movement. Before delving into the Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute, Seoyongseon depicts several important historical events: the Donghak peasant movement and the March 1st movement. Although these events occurred 5 to 30 years before the tenant dispute, they set the stage and greatly influenced its development. The Donghak peasant movement, a large-scale peasant uprising in Joseon in 1894, was organized by farmers suffering from foreign invasions and government corruption. Donghak was a religious and social movement founded by Choi Jae-woo, a leading figure of the late Joseon dynasty, who emphasized egalitarian ideals and the overthrow of the class system. The figure wearing the traditional Korean hat is Choi Jae-woo. Above him is the third-generation leader, Son Byung-hee, and below is the second-generation leader, Choi Si-hyung. Son Byung-hee renamed Donghak as Chon Do-gyo and was one of the 33 leaders of the March 1st movement. The red painting at the bottom shows a scene from the Donghak peasant movement. The artist illustrates the connection between the Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute and the Donghak peasant movement, which sought to abolish unfair traditional practices. The artist highlights that these struggles are related. Taeseok, who led the Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute, had parents who were Donghak followers. The March 1st movement of 1919 had a more direct influence on the Amtae-Tenant farmers' dispute. The March 1st movement greatly awakened the people's sense of independence. Following the March 1st movement, secret societies and independence movements in Korea experienced a rapid increase, with independence activities becoming more active across all sectors of society. It was also around this time that the Shanghai Provisional Government was established. The pavilion behind the figures facing forward depicts the building in Pagoda Park, where the March 1st Declaration of Independence was read aloud. The Russian map, Vladivostok, behind the pavilion, and the Japanese troops allude to the 1905 Portsmouth Conference, held in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to end the Russo-Japanese War, which was mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Through this conference, Japan gained control over Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula from Russia, gaining justification for the Korean invasion. While the peace agreement superficially ended the war, Japan's right to rule Korea was internationally recognized with the implicit approval of the U.S. and Britain. Indeed, Less than 3 months after the Portsmouth Conference, Japan concluded the Ilsa Treaty, which stripped Korea of its diplomatic rights and established a residency general in Seoul, effectively causing Joseon to lose its sovereignty. Sailing. Now you will encounter the important scenes of the Amtae tenant farmers' dispute. The mirror you're viewing depicts roughly 400 Amtae villagers sailing to Mokpo in June 1924 to campaign for the release of tenant farmers' representatives. Why did they have to go to Mokpo? Why were the Amtae farmers' representatives imprisoned? In December 1923, the founding general meeting of the Amtae Tenant Farmers Association was held, in which more than 500 farmers joined the association. They demanded to reduce the rent paid to landlords to 40%. After the colonial rule, most farmers fell to tenant farmer status, while only a few landlords accumulated wealth. The situation on Amtaedo was no different. In the 1920s, the largest landowner on Amtaedo was Moon Jae-chul. Moon's family began accumulating wealth from his father, Moon Tae-hyun, who led salt production by boiling seawater and through maritime trade. Moon Tae-hyun sold the salt to Yeongsan-po, Gangneung-po, and other places, and on return trips brought back daily necessities needed on the island to resell, reportedly making double profits. He had a proven ability to create value. Moon Jae-chul, born as Moon Tae-hyun's second son, inherited the great wealth of his ancestors. By 1915, he owned more than 1.6 million plots of land, 20 times more than that of his father. And by the late 1920s, his landholdings expanded to 3 million plots due to rent increases. He owned land not only in Amtaedo, but throughout Shinhan County in Jeollanam-do, including Tocho, Chaeun, and Chido Islands. It's no exaggeration to say that most tenant disputes in the Jeollanam-do Island of the mid-1920s were caused by Moon's harsh rent collection. Moon Jae-chul refused to accept the Amtaedo tenant farmers' demand to reduce rent to 40%, with the largest landowner, Moon Jae-chul, taking a hardline stance. Other landlords, including the second largest landlord, Chun Woo-bin, were expected to change their stance against tenant farmers. The tenant farmers refused to pay rent to Moon Jae-chul and destroyed the Songdak monument honoring his father, Moon Tae-hyun. This prompted Moon Jae-chul's side to attack and assault farmers' representatives, including Seo Taeseok and Park Chung-nam. 13 farmers' representatives were imprisoned, and over 400 Amtae farmers sailed to Mokpo in June and July of 1924 to demand their release from authorities. Imagine the scene of hundreds of people divided into boats, moving together in one direction. The farmers' boats were wooden vessels dependent on the wind. Amid fierce sea winds, the farmers dressed in white with hungry faces rowed toward Mokpo. Hope would have altered aboard as they faced not only the dangers at sea, but also the threat of the Japanese police force, a threat stronger than nature itself. Yet, they set out with the thought of dying together if we must die. Their courageous hearts, determined faces, and unshakable fears seem visible. Mokpo Cityscape. The third scene depicts Mokpo in the 1920s. At that time, most of the farmer demonstrations were conducted at police stations, courts, and downtown Mokpo. The cityscape you're viewing now represents the urban landscape that the Amtae protesters would have encountered. Mokpo became a modern city in 1894, when it was designated as an open port. Previously, Mokpo was a small harbor, but with government port construction and the arrival of Japanese, Chinese, and Western merchants, the population grew rapidly. Modern structures, including port facilities, roads, trams, and communication networks, was quickly established, and Mokpo became a major export base for agricultural products from the Jeollanam-do region. The Japanese opened Mokpo Station in 1913 to make Mokpo the economic center of southern Japan and a hub for rice products. Soon, the city enacted intensive urban planning, including the construction of modern markets, schools, and hospitals. Large numbers of farmers, merchants, and workers seeking jobs flocked to the city, creating a dynamic atmosphere, while the increase in dock workers and female laborers made life increasingly difficult for Korean laborers. Mokpo was also the center of popular resistance movements. Under the influence of the March 1st movement, independence protests occurred in Mokpo, with many social movements led by laborers, women, and students. Dock workers' strikes, newspapers, and press activities were active, and the civic consciousness of Koreans developed. This mural captures many facets of Mokpo. Unlike the curved lines used to express Amtaedo's mountains and seas, the Mokpo Cityscape is drawn with clear, clean lines. This shows the majesty of a commercial city that developed rapidly after modernization. Simultaneously, in scenes of the police interrogating tenant farmers, we can glimpse the anxiety of Japanese rulers upon intense farmers' resistance. Hunger Strike Alliance. In June and July 1924, the Amtae people traveled to Mokpo for 2 protests. The scene you see here shows the hunger strike from the second protest. According to July 11, 1924 article in Joseon-ilbo, around 600 people participated in the protest, prepared to starve to death in front of the court, vowing not to drink even a sip of water unless the 13 leaders were released. The term Hunger Strike Alliance was also used in newspapers at the time. Artist Saw draws portraits of the farmers who engaged in the uprising, with its bold and powerful brushstrokes. Among them were many elderly people and women. While leaders like Taeseok and Park Bok-young have been revealed for research, there is unfortunately a lack of record recognizing other islanders who participated in the dispute. In addition to the major figures, many people participated in the dispute and even suffered imprisonment, but the details of who they are largely unknown. Even if we alone return, how can we live with our tenant rights completely taken away? These are the words of Go Baek-hwa, one of the key figures of the Amtae tenant farmers dispute. The movement was not only composed of farmers' association, but figures like Go Baek-hwa, who was the representative of the Women's Association. At the age of 68 in 1924, Go Baek-hwa was the oldest among the protesters, frequently appearing in speeches, leading the Hunger Strike Alliance, and actively promoting educational issues. She was also Park Bok-young's mother. These forgotten figures of history gained new life for the artwork of Seoyongseon. Take a close look at each of their faces. It's fine not to know their names. The determination of each of these individuals came together to create the world we live in today. Please remember that the freedom and rights we enjoy today were not simply given to us. Trial. The 25 panel paintings you see here depict the 1924 trial of farmers involved in the tenant dispute. Each panel was painted by the artist's patrons, making it a collaborative creation. When landlord Moon Jae-chul refused to reduce rent to 40%, tensions between farmers and landlords escalated, leading to an assault on tenant farmers. In response, the Tenant Farmers Association destroyed Moon Tae-hyun's monument, and 13 tenant leaders, including Taeseok, were arrested and put on trial. In 1924, the Gwangju District Court sentenced Taeseok to 24 years imprisonment. The law was not on the farmers' side. The backs of the tenant farmers on trial, under the gaze of 5 Japanese judges, is a reminder of the unfairness farmers endured. 서태석, 서창석, 김운재, 박병완, 김세중. The 19 names on the wall are those who played leading roles in the tenant dispute and were brought to trial. What happened after the trial? Was this the end of the dispute? In fact, the farmers' rebellion intensified. Particularly the Amtaedo Hunger Strike Alliance gained nationwide attention through the media. Fearing that the protests would escalate, authorities urged Moon Jae-chul to reconcile. Finally, in late August 1924, a settlement was reached, including a 40% rent with 10% as agricultural incentives, and a donation of 2,000 won to the tenant farmers. The terms reflected a clear victory for tenant farmers. However, these conditions were not legally enforced. Moon Jae-chul merely bent his will to public opinion, and almost none of the terms were actually implemented. Conflict. Here, the figures faced different directions. The inscriptions, capital, democracy, communism, south, north, show the divisions in Korean society. Artists saw roughly carved the wooden boards, leaving them like bruised bark, with the grain facing up and down. In the 1920s, Korea was undergoing a huge ideological conflict. Korean consciousness was divided between two schools of thought, democracy and socialism. Nationalists mainly emphasized empowerment, self-governance, and independence, while socialists emphasized class liberation and worker revolution. Ideology can unite people, but also divide them. The seeds of what will later become the North-South divide were already being planted during this time. The three words carved on the board, capital, democracy, communism, depict the lives of the main protagonists of the tenant dispute, Taeseok, Park Bo-kyung, and Moon Jae-chul. In late 1924, after the agreement between landlords and farmers, these three individuals each set out on paths of capital, democracy, and communism. After the tenant dispute, Taeseok showed great enthusiasm for peasant movements and communist movements, but ended his life due to mental illness caused by torture after effects. Park Bo-kyung engaged in youth movements and later became part of the right-wing faction. Moon Jae-chul became a capitalist after liberation. While Moon had many dishonorable traces, including being named as a pro-Japanese member for the Special Investigation Committee of Anti-National Activists, he also gained fame as an educator by establishing schools in the Mokpo region from his own wealth. Though their lives differed, all three received awards from the Korean government. In 1977, Park Bo-kyung received a presidential commendation, and in 1990 was awarded the Order of Merit for National Foundation, the National Medal. Moon Jae-chul became an education patriot in 1993. A decade later, in 2003, Taeseok also received the Order of Merit for the National Foundation. In the end, the Korean government recognized the different paths of these three men and one of the many faces of our society. Looking at the sky. Now, we stand before a striking mural that catches everyone's attention. This painting shows the final moments of Taeseok, the leader who founded the tenant dispute. Born in Amtae, Taeseok was said to be intelligent from an early age. His family was independent farmers, and by his teens, he had already mastered Chinese classics and medical texts. In 1901, at the age of 16, he cured an outbreak of plague in Anjwamyeon and was praised as a skilled physician. From 1913 to 1919, he was appointed head of Amtaemen. It was not until 1919 that Taeseok, who had not shown much resistance to the colonial regime prior to his appointment, was radically inspired by the March 1st movement. After resigning from his district head position in the fall of 1919, Taeseok traveled to Yeosun, Daejeon, and Gyeongsang from December to February of 1920. The experience made him realize the international plight of colonial Joseon. Immediately after his return, Seo joined independence protests in Mokpo and was even sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment. His experience inspired him to become a radical activist. While leading the farmers' dispute, Seo was repeatedly imprisoned, and by the mid-1920s, he was actively involved in socialist and communist movements. Though he had a passionate nature and often neglected his health, he was helpless in the face of extreme torture he endured during detention. According to testimonies, Taeseok's mental health in the later years was severely damaged from electrical torture, to the point where he couldn't recognize his relatives. When Taeseok appeared in the village, people would run away. We can only imagine how empty his final years were. Taeseok died alone in the fields of Amtaedo, with no one around to help him. The artist imagines his final moments based on the story that he died clutching rice leaves. By enlarging his figure and using a white base to contrast with the darker colors of the concrete walls, the artist depicts Taeseok's final moment with great intensity. What's striking are his bulging eyes, the pupils lying in the furrow, staring off into the distance. What was Taeseok looking at in that moment? How might he have reflected on his past life? Did he die without a chance to reflect? The official year of Seo's death varies between 1943 and 1958, revealing how he became forgotten in history. In 2003, a decade after his death, he was awarded the Order of Merit for the National Foundation. Above Taeseok's mural are 4 portraits. From left to right, human rights lawyer Kim Hyung-lo, who volunteered legal defense for Amtaedo during Japanese occupation, leader Park Bok-young, who succeeded in Taeseok's absence during his imprisonment, Taeseok, and female leader Ko Baek-hwa. The path of tenant farmers. Inside the wire mesh is an installation representing the tenant farmers. The tenant dispute was led by Amtaedo tenant farmers who were trapped in a system led by Korean landowners and Japanese landlords. This installation represents the farmer's confinement, and the inverted figure indicates a distorted interpretation. In 1894, Mokpo became Korea's 4th open port. The Japanese began seizing land in the Jeollanam-do Island, and after annexing Korea in 1910, the seizures occurred in the name of land service projects. During this period, many farmers were reduced to tenant farmers. Under Japanese rule, rent rose to 80%. In 1920, out of a total population of 17 million in Joseon, 14 million were peasants, of whom only 3% were landlords, 19.5% were sharecroppers, and 77% were tenant farmers. It was in the early 1920s, after the March 1st movement, that the peasants grew in consciousness and began to speak against the unjust reality. By this time, protests grew at an alarming rate in Korea. Farmers' disputes were not limited to armed protests or hunger strikes. Farmers worked to awaken consciousness by educating children, youth, and women. The farmers realized that early education took priority over armed struggle. Tenant farmers in the field. The Amtaedo Seoyongseon Museum was reportedly built in a grain warehouse in the 1980s. While preserving the warehouse with few modifications, what immediately catches the eye are two murals painting on the building's exterior. Looking from the Kidong intersection towards Namgang-dok, two farmers stand in a field of blue sky and sea. On the other exterior wall, Seoul pictures many farmers in clean blue brushstrokes. The murals boldly announce who owns this space. Closing remarks. It's now time to conclude our visit to the Amtaedo Sojak Resistance Museum. What did you think? Artist Seoyongseon depicted the major scenes of the Amtae tenant farmers' dispute with his bold brushstrokes. The artist encompasses not only the dispute's major figures, but also many other farmers that history failed to record. By finding the origins of the tenant dispute in the Donghak peasant movement and the March 1st movement, Seo broadens our understanding of history. The artist showed us how it began. Now, we must write the finish. The Amtae tenant farmers dispute began in 1923, but its message is ongoing. What we encounter here at the Amtaedo Seoyongseon Museum is the story of those who refuse to surrender their dreams to reality. This museum honors those who fought on, not because they weren't afraid, but because they were. The museum records more than the fight of tenant farmers against landlords. The museum's true power lies in the people who acted despite their terror. These aren't just stories of the past. They're living narratives that speak to our present. Good art doesn't simply preserve history. It makes us question how we're living today. I hope this exhibition resonates with you. Thank you for listening. This has been Lee Sarah. About artist Seoyongseon. Seoyongseon is a Korean contemporary artist with powerful colors, structures, and rich human reflection. He graduated from Seoul National University's Department in Painting and its graduate school, then taught there as a professor from 1986 to 2008. Having begun painting in 1979, he is most fitting when introduced as a person who paints. Seoyongseon is known for his condensed yet structured composition, portraits, urban landscapes, and historical events. While his paintings can be classified as history paintings, such as the Amtae Tenant Farmers Dispute collection, this term barely captures the artist's vision. Seoyongseon isn't just documenting history. This isn't about remembering events we never lived through. Beyond all that, these are stories about people. Real people caught up in Korea's rapid modernization. The artist's focus isn't on urbanization itself, but on the human lives changed by these great changes. Seoyongseon ignores trends and digs deeper into humanity, into himself, into what really matters. His work captures our reality, the pain we carry, the hope that drives us, the anxiety that haunts us, and the healing we seek. Seoyongseon's major works span 4 key areas. His city series captures Korea's urban transformation. His portrait series turns the lens on himself and others with piercing honesty. His history paintings tackle pivotal moments in Korean history, and his Red Eye series with their bloodshot gazes. His work has earned its place in Korean contemporary art, collected by major museums, including the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art.